models for Black students. Hopefully, members of the task force received some of the materials that I asked you to kind of deliberate over, think about as we enter into today's meeting. I'm going to start, and hopefully you've also received an agenda. And just to recap, I'm going to start by just doing a little bit of an overview about the work that has preceded today's meeting. We'll engage. Part of that will be reviewing a little bit of the things that have been happening in both the book study and the learning session that were conducted over this past month. Then we're going to launch into the main portion of our meeting, which is continuing to refine our framework and engage in the framework development process, particularly building out the different dimensions and the look-fors that can be used to populate the template we're contemplating, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my overview. Then we'll debrief. We're going to break into small groups to do that work. Then we'll debrief the small group discussions. Randall Sampson's going to lead us in a little bit of a discussion around portfolio curation. And then we'll end with just recapping some next steps. So I'm going to share my screen here and launch us into sort of the recap of where we've been, and where we're going. Hopefully people can see my screen. So where have we been? We started out our very first meeting talking about the purposes of the task force. We also heard a very compelling data presentation by members of my data team. We then solicited from members of the task force best practices templates, their own descriptions about the things happening in their schools or districts that are of significance. We then at our second meeting had some districts make various presentations. And that was, again, helpful and informative. For those of you who are curious, I'm turning my camera off because I'm getting a little bit of signal that perhaps my network is being challenged. Hopefully you can continue to still hear me. We had some district presentations. 3 districts came to present to us, and then I asked members of the task force to reflect on what they had heard. And then what we heard from those presentations, as well as from the district prepared best practices templates, then were synthesized into a sort of a draft framework that then formed the basis of our discussion, and that led to further refinements of that framework. And that's how we ended the last meeting. And then since then, we've had a book study. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've started a book study. And those of you who are participating know that we had 2 sessions of the book by Karen Chenoweth called Districts That Succeed. And we also had a learning session conducted by the Alliance for Resource Equity, which is an organization made up in combination of Education Trust and Education Resource Strategies, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And that sort of recaps the where we've been portion of my presentation. As I always do in these meetings, want to refresh our memories about the key purposes of the work group. It starts with purpose 1, which gets its own slide because it's really the primary focus is identifying and understanding best academic and non-academic practice models, strategies, and actions that help close achievement gaps for Black students in Ohio schools. And then the other purposes are largely derivative from that. The second one is about change management, because we know sometimes we know what we need to do, but it's hard to actually do it. And so part of our work is focused on the change management process. Purpose 3 is something that we will focus on today, or that will derive from today's work, is really creating a template and some self-assessment tools, and perhaps even leveraging other tools that exist. Purpose 4 is really how do we best disseminate and promote the use of the best practice models that we identify. The 5th purpose is how do we measure and monitor and gauge the progress that we're making. And then purposes 6 and 7 really have to do with expectations. First and foremost, for the academic achievement for each student, and then second for the statewide education system, including targets for closing achievement gaps. And I always, as I refresh your memory about the purposes, I always take the opportunity to remind people that we always do this work in respect of the primacy that school districts have in terms of curriculum selection and curriculum, utilization, and also in respect of teachers, their professional judgment, their professional training, and the choices that they make in terms of what happens in the classrooms in the context of their district and school guidelines and choices. So I want to, and I want to ask some of those of you who are on the call to perhaps reflect. As I said, one of the things we started, and we've had 2 sessions now, is a book study on a book by Karen Chenoweth, who is affiliated with Education Trust, called Districts That Succeed: Breaking the Correlation Between Race, Poverty, and Achievement. I really love that title because so many times it's so easy when you run the numbers, you see these correlations, and a lot of times people sort of imply, well, there must be some sort of causality. But I think we all know we can break a correlation if we figure out what we need to do differently to, not really acknowledge that race, poverty, and are contributing factors to achievement, because they're not. And part of Chenoweth's point is we see districts that succeed, we see schools that succeed, and we try to learn from them and unlock those secrets and then apply those to our work. I'd love it if some of you who participated in the book study might reflect on a couple of key takeaways or things that you've been really, been learning as we've been going through that experience. Anybody want to weigh in? And I'll remind you, you can use your hand raising feature. Usually it's at the top of your screen. Sometimes it's next to your microphone button. Just raise your hand and offer any reflections that you might have. Meryl, I think I see your hand up. You want to reflect a little bit?
Yes, thanks, Paulo. First of all, I'm really appreciating the book. I think one of the takeaways was the stress on 2 things: the stress on the importance of leadership, the importance of having quality principals in the building, and the other one was the importance of building trust among the staff. And that seems to be, for me, I imagine that as being quite a challenge for leadership to develop that trust so that you can move forward with success.
Yeah, and building trust takes time, especially for a new leader.
Yes.
But I think you hit on a really great point, because part of the takeaway is that it's not just the work of individual teachers, it's the work of the systems in the school and the organization of the school itself in terms of making a difference for student achievement. Ship, do you want to offer some reflection as well?
Yes, sir. And to build on what Meryl said, also the partnership with the community and having them involved and having the same terms and language.
Absolutely. And I think that came out loud and clear in the chapter we talked about at our last meeting, which was about Chicago, and how the philanthropic community and the higher education community and the advocacy community came forward and really provided a supportive environment for the school system to become more data focused, more research focused, more school building systems focused, stronger leadership, and so forth and so on. This slide that I'm sharing, I have some of the key takeaways at a very kind of high level from the book. And some of these are so simple. This notion that really believing that all kids can succeed, that fundamental notion of what we're expecting of students, that commitment to really teaching all kids and never looking at a group of kids and saying, well, some of these students might not make it. The idea of actually showing your own vulnerability, knowing that you may not have all the answers, and seeking out those that are doing better and learning from them. And then this focus on the systems in a school, commitment to ongoing learning by adults, and really emphasizing the notion that the school is sort of the unit of delivery. It's not just the classroom. Anyone else want to weigh in? We're also recording those book study sessions. And if anybody wants to join us going forward, we're happy to send out. I can resend the invitation to task force members. Anyone else can just send an email, and we can include you in the book study as well. The other thing is we had a learning session. Oh, I'm sorry, Superintendent Cosby. Do you want to go ahead and reflect as well?
Yes, I really enjoyed the idea. I really didn't enjoy it, but I thought it was so important that Chicago decided, once they were deemed as the worst school, that they were going to just put that information out there and accept the help that was given. Sometimes I think that we want to sort of hide behind our numbers and act like, well, there's so many excuses for it, but you're not going to get the help that was needed. And so remember the um, organizations that were helping with that data, they went from just admiring that data to saying, wait a minute, we need more money so that we can actually study it and determine what would be the best practice. And I feel like that's sort of what we're talking about. What do we need to do to help our Black students? And we're not going to step away from the fact that right now my grades aren't good. I'm going to say it, acknowledge it, and try to make it better for my students.
Absolutely. I think the other thing was those outside entities didn't just sit back and look and measure what was happening. They actually helped promote trying new things and then gauging whether those new things were actually making a difference. And I think that was a very compelling part of the Chicago story as well. Okay, as I said, the other thing we did was we had some of the staff from Ed Trust talk to us about the Alliance for Resource Equity. And it's really, it has a lot of relevance to the work that we're doing because they too, with a focus on equity, have identified a number of key dimensions. And those are shown on this slide, 10 different dimensions that in many ways align to the 4 categories that we've identified in our framework. And they touch on many of the same elements. And what they've done at Education Trust and Education Resource Strategies is then also provided, 3 different kinds of tools. The first one is a document called the Education Combination, and it really discusses these 10 different dimensions and how they fit together in the interest of creating a more equity-focused school and district delivery structure. And then they've developed their own sort of diagnostic tool to help schools and districts identify different strengths and gaps in those different dimensions in the work that they do. And then finally, they're doing a set of guidebooks around each of the dimensions. I think they have 2 or 3 already developed that help dig deeper into those issue areas and guide schools and districts in doing work differently. This may be a tool that we ultimately make reference to in our template and in the other work that we're doing. But I'm always on the lookout for things that can continue to help inform the framework development work that we're doing. And I found this was very interesting. Is there anybody that wants to that participated in the webinar that they presented and wants to reflect on anything they heard during that webinar? Again, that webinar was also recorded, and I've shared that out with task force members, and I can do that again for those of you who may be interested. So let's dive into me laying the groundwork for today's activity. And first and foremost, one of the things I sent out to you after the last meeting was a synthesis of the feedback I heard from you, which was that we ought to compress the categories. We had 6 categories, as you know, as part of our framework when we started. And based on the feedback and the discussions, the really rich discussions we had last time, we decided that we would condense them into 4. And those are leadership and organizational commitment. That's really the fundamental. And this is one of the things that comes out in the book study, just repeated importance of both district level leadership as well as building level leadership. And in some ways, even staff level leadership plays a role in that. The second one is really the nuts and bolts of the academic practice, curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. The third one is really those additional supports that are provided to students, student supports, and that student empowerment that's so necessary to create those conditions where students want to learn and they want to engage in the learning experience. And then finally, the fourth factor was community and family supports and partnerships, recognizing that there are these external, partners that are so fundamental to the accomplishment of a high quality educational experience and what that's about. So the work we're about today, and hopefully you read, there was an initial document I sent out about a week ago, and then a revised version of that document that I sent out a couple of days ago, which really speaks to this idea of taking this framework and now building it out into subunits. First, a set of dimensions, which are sort of like big-ish items within that category. And then for each dimension, identifying a list of look-fors What would you want to see when you walked into a building that was evidence of that particular category being paid attention to, right? And so one of the things to help us understand what we're developing is I wanted to put in front of you today a mock-up of what the template and again, this is subject to change, subject to your feedback and input. This is just meant to be illustrative, but I think it captures the right ideas. In other words, and this would be a multi-page document that starts with the category listed at the top and some sort of brief description of the category, a summary of the various dimensions of the category, also listed in this descriptive area at the top. And then a table that for each dimension lists the different look-fors, right? And then has a rating scale here off to the right-hand side, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that, I'm not wed to these numbers or what have you, but the point is that, are those things, and here's the little key at the bottom, 1 is not present, 2 is just beginning, 3 is maturing, 4 is well established, and high quality. And so this tool serves as a way to say, okay, given that this is one of the dimensions of leadership and organizational commitment, am I seeing the things that I'd like to see? And this PR column means priority, because this tool could also be used by a school or district that's doing a little bit of a self-assessment to say, hey, this, either this upcoming year or this next semester, we want to prioritize working on this particular area. So you might put a check in that box. And then if a number of people do this in a school, they could use that then to drive, a planning process that might lay the foundation of what they do going forward. So again, each, you'd have each dimension, each look-for, you'd have multiple pages. And then at the bottom, we would put some brief, comments about the research, good research that people can go to that relates back to this category, as well as other tools and resources that might use. And some of those tools might be department tools like the Whole Child Framework, or our Each Child Means Each Child report, or it may be, tools that are available from other organizations or what have you. What we're also trying to do is make sure this template is suitably framed to work for like an advocacy group, a group of parents, a local or urban league or NAACP chapter, or some group that's gotten together that says we really want to support our school, and these are the kinds of things that we know are important in the interest of having an excellent educational experience for our Black students. And as some of you have commented to me, this is true for all students, but in particular, I think our focus is on the deliberateness of addressing the achievement gaps that schools and districts identify. So let me stop here just a little bit to ask if you all have any questions, because part of this is my attempt at saying, let's begin with the end in mind. The end in mind is to have a template like this that's populated with these different categories and then dimensions and then look-fors, because the bulk of our time together today, we're going to, instead of breaking into 4 groups, we're going to break into 2 groups. So they're a little bigger than they were last time. I got some feedback that the groups were a little bit on the small side last time, a little bit bigger groups, and really sort through this dimension component and the look-for component. What questions or reflections do you have on your minds? It always concerns me when nobody wants to speak up. Ship, you're smiling there. Any thoughts or comments offhand?
No, just ready to get to the work.
Yeah, does it make sense to you? This is maybe my question is, you understand, because when I put you in the small groups, you're going to be on your own. You're going to have some great facilitation, but I love the way you phrase it. You're ready to dive in the work. That's what I like to hear. Randall, do you want to reflect a little bit?
Yeah, Paulo, I think it was very critical what you just said, to kind of get us kickstarted, that this process provides clarity for any groups out there that are outside of schools, that want to help, that want to drive the process, that need information, to kind of track where we are as a district or as a school. So I think this is critical for that, because that's where we often struggle. And I think somebody else said prior to you saying something about community, making sure that the community is aligned with the vision and the mission about what the school is trying to accomplish. I think this gets at that, and making the things very visible with the portfolio feature that we'll talk about later. So I think that's critical right now, and I think this helps propel us.
And I think your point is really right on, because it also pushes us to not use jargon, not use inaccessible language. Make sure it's accessible and usable by people who may not be in education. And part of that will be incumbent on us as staff, as we listen to you all and process this stuff, to make sure we use language that people can easily understand instead of some of the jargon that we so often migrate to in the education system. The other thing Randall reminds me is that you'll see I include the word portfolio, and Randall's going to give us a little presentation later on today about what this portfolio concept is. Because I think what we didn't want is that simply to be, a checklist that people use to say, oh yeah, I'm doing that, or I'm doing this. We really want people to assemble a portfolio of, and it could be video, it could be other formats of evidence that show that this particular look for is in fact happening. And with technology, we have ways of capturing that. And Randall's going to talk about some of his experience in doing that in a little short segment we'll do after the small group discussion. Okay, with that, let me go to the, let me dive a little bit deeply into the experience, and then hopefully at 1 o'clock, I'll set you all loose. So we're going to build on the revised categories. We're going to build out the dimensions and the look fors. Hopefully you understand what that is. But I think I'm going to illustrate it a little bit in these next few slides, just to kind of crystallize in your head how this is going to work. We're going to have two groups. Group A is going to work on categories 1 and 3. And you are going to go to another Teams meeting. Carolyn has either sent you or will send you here shortly an invitation to a second room in Teams. You're not going to be automatically assigned. So you're going to have to go pull that email and go into a second room. The group B will stay in this meeting room. So you just hang tight while other people migrate into room A. And group B in this room is going to do categories 2 and 4. Now, I want to make it clear to everybody, we're going to have 1 hour to do this work, but that's not the last word you're going to have on this. So don't feel like, don't get frustrated. Don't get like, oh my gosh, how can we do this in an hour? It might seem a little overwhelming for you, but just take it as it comes. And there'll be other opportunities as we synthesize from what we hear today. You'll be able to weigh in. And in fact, this will also form the basis for some stakeholder engagement that I'm going to talk to you later about, having you all help me facilitate and maybe even have you do some of with your peers and your colleagues, right? And what we will ultimately do is synthesize the feedback from today we'll actually start blowing it into a template and showing it to you in that way, so that again you can further think through. Because I always realize that people, they have immediate reactions to things, but sometimes after thinking about it for a day or two, they have even more robust responses and ideas. And I want everybody to know you should always feel comfortable in sending me emails or communicating with me in between meetings with different ideas or different thoughts that you have about the work going forward. Ship, you want to reflect for a moment there?
Not so much a reflection, but just a question of clarity. Yeah. So that what you just described also is referring to the subcommittees that you also presented in your email?
Absolutely. We'll talk a little bit about the subcommittees later on, but by the end of, and I'm glad you raised that, because I think I actually have a slide about that here somewhere too. Let me get back to where I'm supposed to be. I'm going to ask if there are any volunteers to be part of two subcommittees, one on data and one on research. And you're absolutely right. We'll figure out ways to make sure we both stay in communication with the Fuller Task Force, but always inviting commentary and feedback in very real time. And that's true of anything that relates to the work. If maybe you're reading an article in something you read and you think, oh wow, this really has relevance to the task force's work, you should feel free to send that our way. The more we can receive from you that we can use to populate the resources and the research, the better that's going to be. And because, this is where you play a real role in making a contribution. Okay, so I want to walk through very quickly. This is a sample. This is going to be, I guess, Group A. You'll see a slide with the category name at the top, and the dimensions will be presented. Category 3 is student supports and empowerment. There are 3 dimensions. that I'm putting on the table as a starting point. These are illustrative. These are not carved in stone. These are meant to inspire you and motivate you to think about, does this represent a good subdivision of this macro level category of student supports and empowerment? And you should feel free for the answer to be, well, no, it doesn't. It's missing something, or I'm not sure what these words mean, or I want to, I think some of these can be combined, or what have you. But the point is, to think about it at a dimensions level, and then for each dimension, there is a proposed list of look-fors, right? So this first dimension is meeting the needs of the whole child, meeting whole child needs. And the look-for is, well, is the organization using the department's whole child framework and paying attention to some of the key elements of that framework, like child nutrition and physical and mental health services and safety and so forth and so on. And then for each dimension, you will have those look-fors, and your facilitators will talk you through. And what I want you to ask yourself is, what are the things that I see? What are the things that I feel like are missing? What are the things that maybe don't belong? And is there, and when it becomes populated on a template, could a person go through and say, okay, yeah, I know what this means. I know what it might look like in a portfolio. And yes, if I see it, I would consider that to be a good thing. And you'll see throughout here, there's references to data, there's references to, feedback, there's references to structures and so forth and so on. But I know there are missing things. So the challenge to you is to add those things in that you think are important. Cut out the things that you think are superfluous or not really clear, or maybe not even relevant, and continue to refine this as we continue to develop the work. Okay. I'm going to turn to my facilitators and see if they have any questions or if they want to say anything before we start the breakouts. Stephanie Siddons and Heather Boughton are going to be our facilitators. Stephanie or Heather, anything you want to share?
Paulo, I think I'm okay. I'll just, we'll do our best to take notes. I think our goal is to document the discussion, and as Paulo indicated, if needed, if we don't get everything down, we can always collect that information after the meeting. So just want you to know there are multiple ways to get that.
Yeah. And some of these categories are fairly lengthy. The leadership category is lengthy for Group A. The curriculum category, curriculum and instructional practices, is kind of heavy for Group B. And then each of you has a smaller category as the second category. And again, do your best to get through it, but don't feel rushed, and don't and know that this isn't your last opportunity, because sometimes I think people get flustered if they think, hey, I may not never see. You will have plenty of opportunities to continue to weigh in and refine this work. Okay. With that, it is now 1 o'clock. I'm going to give you 1 hour. I will be checking in, moving back and forth. And so those of you who received an email that says you're in group, which group is going to the other location?
Group A.
Group A. If you've received that email, go ahead and sign on, leave this meeting and go to the Group A meeting, and then be back to this meeting at 2 o'clock. Those of you who are in the group that stays here, just hang out for 2 or 3 minutes. And then who's going to be in this? This is Stephanie's group.
This is Heather's group.
This is Heather's group. Heather will start you all at 103 or 104. And for our visitors, our visitors should be perfectly free to stay in this room if you'd like, and that probably works the best. If you would like to be in the other room, you can shoot Carolyn Jones an email, and she'll send you the link to the other room. Her email is carolyn.jones@education.ohio.gov.
And I put that in the chat.
Oh, very good.
All right. Hi, everyone. As Paulo said, we're going to give people a couple minutes to get sorted out with the groups, and then we'll kick off our discussion. All right. I think we can probably go ahead and get started. So just good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Boughton. If I've not met you before, I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the department, and really pleased to have an opportunity to facilitate this discussion and hear your thoughts about these categories, dimensions, and look-fors that you're all working to develop. Really excited to engage with you in this conversation. So I am going to just start, you heard Paulo a little bit ago talking about the template that we're working to create and how it will be structured. As in its current form, it's organized around 4 categories. And within each of those categories, there are dimensions that are fairly high-level subtopics. And then for each of those dimensions, we're trying to identify some look-fors, some sort of tangible things that we can see within a district or a school that serves as evidence or a demonstration of action that they are doing this thing that we believe is important for supporting Black students. Paulo talked about the 4 categories that you have all been working towards. The category 1 is leadership and organizational commitment. Category 2 is curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. Category 3 is the student supports and empowerment category. And then the 4th category is around community and family supports and partnerships. We have 2 small groups today. We are Group B, and we're going to be focusing on categories 2 and 4. And so that's the curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports category, and then the community and family supports and partnerships. And we will, as Paulo said, come back together after this small group discussion and have a fairly extensive period of time for the groups to sort of report out and hear from each other about those discussions. So you'll get a chance to talk a little bit about your thoughts on those other categories as well. In the document that you all received, the categories, dimensions, look-fors discussion guide, version 2, Paulo started sort of outlining what some of the dimensions and look-fors might be for these categories. This is just a starting point. Nothing is set in stone at this point, but it gives us something to react to and talk through during our discussion today. So we're just starting with those as a foundation. We really want to use this time to get all of your collective knowledge and expertise and feedback to refine these dimensions and look-fors and start to get to a point of general consensus around these. I'll reiterate what Paulo said and what Stephanie said. This, of course, is not your only opportunity to provide feedback at any point. If you, think of something else that you want to share, or you're just sort of mulling over something at any point, always feel free to reach out to Paulo or others to provide your feedback on these. So this will be an iterative process. And then the last sort of reminder that I wanted to share around our goal here is that we're trying to create tools that schools and districts and advocacy groups can use to gauge the extent to which best academic practice models are being implemented. So we want to create something that's going to make sense to people and be usable in a very practical sense. And so that's our goal in doing these things. Yes, I see we have a question about resending the document. And Carolyn, are you on this group right now, or are you perhaps in the other group?
I'm here.
Great. Could you send Laurel the document, please? Oh, and then I see, Tia, we have another a question about what the first category was. The first category is leadership and organizational commitment. And the first category that we'll be talking about today is category 2, and it's curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. So in a moment, I'm going to share my screen, but I just want to pause and see if there's any questions or comments that anyone would like to share at this point. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So give me one moment. I should have this up and running. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Kayla- Oh, thank you. And
Yes.
Kayla, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a question or comment?
I do. I just wanted to know, are non-task force individuals that are part of this specific session, are we allowed to participate in providing content and information, or are we still just kind of sitting back and listening on how things go?
I think that we want to make sure our task force members have an opportunity to share their comments, but I think if time allows, I think it's love to hear your feedback as well.
Thank you for clarifying.
Heather, can you also make the slide part a little bit larger, maybe using the slider along the there you go. Or maybe
That a little better.
Yeah, I think so.
That's better. Okay. Great. Okay, I'm going to share some slides that capture the categories, the draft dimensions, and the look-fors. And I am going to be taking notes as we talk. So I'll be capturing those within this PowerPoint. And as I'm taking notes, please, if I've written something and you can see it and it doesn't quite capture what you shared or what you heard, please don't hesitate to let me know so I can make sure that I accurately capture our conversation here today. What we're going to do is kind of go through, we're going to start with category 2, and we're going to take a quick look through the dimensions and the look-fors. And we'll do that all the way through one time without discussion, but then we'll go back and go through a little more slowly and talk about the dimensions, and then we'll talk about the look-fors underneath those. So as we're going through this the first time through, start to think about your reactions to these and what do you see that might be, or what don't you see that might be missing, that needs to be added, what might need to be clarified or refined, and we'll go back then and have more discussion about these. Okay, all right, so category 2, curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. Oh, I don't know if you can, there we go, is currently divided into 6 dimensions, or I should say there are 6 dimensions that we've identified that contribute to this category. The first, evidence-based instructional framework or program, quality curriculum, excellent teaching and learning practices, meaningful instructional, professional development and coaching, conditions conducive to student learning, and then finally, beyond the classroom, academic supports based on student needs. So for each of these dimensions, we then have a series of draft look-fors. And these, again, are going to be practical things that we can see happening and that can serve as evidence of a sort of implementation of best practices. So under the under dimension 1, evidence-based instructional framework, some of the look-fors that we've included here are school and district use. The school or district uses a specific instructional framework. They have shared language and practice around that framework and can implement it with fidelity. There's specific time set aside for teacher collaboration, use of proven comprehensive programs like High Schools at Work or Early College High Schools and others, access to career technical education opportunities, and access to work-based learning opportunities for students. Second dimension is quality curriculum. Here we're looking to see if teachers achieve a deep understanding of subject area standards and can align their lessons to those standards. Selection of quality instructional materials and appropriate professional development and support. Dimension 3 is around excellent teaching and learning practices. So some look-fors here may include that students are challenged and held to high expectations. They're doing grade level or higher work. The school or district is using multi-tiered systems of support. There's cultural relevance incorporated into the curriculum and lessons, use of technology to support learning, and focus on student engagement and personalization of learning. Dimension 4, meaningful instructional, professional development and coaching. So the school or district is implementing quality professional development, and teachers are receiving frequent and meaningful observations and actionable feedback on their practices. Dimension 5, conditions conducive to student learning. The look-fors here may include effective classroom management and behavioral support processes like PBAS or PACS Good Behavior Game or others. Dimension 6, beyond the classroom academic supports, the look-fors may include quality tutoring opportunities available for those students who need them, more learning time, and use of supplemental learning tools. And those are the 6 dimensions that we have captured thus far for this category 2. So now I'm going to go back up to our first screen here, category 2, the overall look at the dimensions. And we want to start here by talking about these dimensions and whether or not they capture what you would expect to see here. Is there anything missing? Is there anything that you don't feel belongs here? Do you think it's worth clarifying any of these? And so I'm going to stop for a moment and open it up to you all and start to hear your thoughts about these dimensions. Gemma, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, define for me evidence-based instructional framework or program. And I'm thinking of this through the eyes of parents or family members. I understand it within the context of educational ease within the system, but what I have found to be issues is that when things are presented to the general public or parents or family members, the clarity of it at that level, it's kind of like saying acetylsalicylic acid as opposed to just saying aspirin, right? So how would others, you or others, define evidence-based instructional framework as opposed to evidence-based, right? Evidence-based is clear. You need to see it. You should see it at this time or this period. But instructional framework, kind of redefine that, not necessarily using specific educational terms of evidence-based instructional framework. Is that possible?
Maybe if we called it evidence-based instructional practices.
One would be a way of good, because then you could get to seeing the practice.
Right.
Okay.
That's a good thought. Some people would, the wording of that would stop somebody that's not in education.
Yeah, and I think, Gemma, you make a really great point. And again, I think we in education think about certain instructional frameworks, whether it's Hattie's, visible learning, or Schlechty's, working on the work, or what have you. And I think you're absolutely right. The challenge is to, on the one hand, respect those ideas with the educators that might use this tool, but at the same time, describe better what that actually means, where there's a systematization of the approach to learning, ranging from what, clarity around what students are expected to know, how the instruction is going to be delivered, how it's going to be measured, and how it then is going to be refined and improved upon. So we will work on that.
Okay, thank you.
I also love that your question and comment put right up front the idea that we need to be transparent about these tools that families and students and communities need to understand what we're talking about. I love that you put that out there immediately, and something good for us to keep in mind throughout this whole discussion. We have a number of other hands raised, so let me take a quick look here. I apologize. My computer's moving a little slowly, so I can't see the full list, but Ship, I believe your hand is raised, and then we have a few others as well.
Yes, ma'am. I just echoing what Gemma said, but also looking under dimension number 1, where it says a shared language, that goes right to what we were doing with the book study and what it talks about in Chicago. We have to have that shared dialogue, that shared terminology, that shared language for everyone to understand it. If it doesn't, then it doesn't appear transparent. So because it would seem like we're using jargon, I believe, as Paulo said earlier, that just seems like it goes just with us, just with the education system, where we need to make sure that it's broadened to where everyone can understand it. Thank you.
Right. And I apologize. As I said, my connection is moving a little slowly here. So if your hand is raised, please go ahead and chime in right now, because I'm trying to pull up the list and it's moving very slowly.
Marcia, I think I saw your hand up. Do you want to say something? Go ahead, Marcia.
Okay, thank you. My comment was just really to the issue of the framework, and that is because frameworks change from time to time. So if parents or community members have been engaged in some particular framework that's been adopted at one point in time, it's important to know what particular framework is being observed at this point in time.
That's great. And maybe you would add to that too, that it's important to keep in mind that as we do change frameworks, perhaps with good cause, that be communicated clearly out to parents and families as well, the reasons for that. Right.
In some ways, there's, I think, a similar definitional issue around the word curriculum. Again, we all know what curriculum is, but and so maybe we need to find the words like the actual lessons, the actual textbooks or what. And I think some of that comes out in the look fors, but as I'm reading through this through that accessibility lens, I think that surfaces. Merle, I see your hand up. You want to go next?
Yes, I really appreciate. Are we discussing just this, or are we also discussing the dimensions? I mean, are we going to be discussing? What's under each?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're going to go through each of these dimensions and talk more about the look fors for each of those dimensions. We wanted to start by getting a sense for whether these felt like the right dimensions.
Okay, my comment was on the look fors, so I'll wait until we get to the look fors. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other thoughts about, are these the right 6 dimensions? Is there anything missing here that you would expect to think about when you're thinking about curriculum practices and instructional practices and academic supports?
Hello, can I be heard?
Yes.
Pardon?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to ask on, we're saying that we want parents and community to be involved, or for it to be transparent so that everyone has an understanding of what's being presented. Let me ask you, are you going to do any focus groups with these parents so they can tell you what they understand or what they don't understand, or how they would better be able to understand what is being done for their children? Because I'm of the mindset that this is for African American Black students. So are we going to involve African American parents? I hear on one hand, I hear Black students, and then I hear all students, and then I hear whoever wants to volunteer to do this. So I'm not clear.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. And to be clear, the purpose of this group is to focus specifically on Black students and the best practices to support them in their academics. And so many of these things that we talk about may be best practices for other student subgroups as well, but we do want to use this space to really specifically think about supports for Black students. And I think it's a wonderful idea to make sure that we are engaging those families and students in this conversation to make sure that our way of thinking about this makes sense to them. So I will make a note about that, certainly here.
Thank you.
And I saw there was a question in the comment box about what excellent means. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, or we can get into that a little bit more under the look-fors around excellent teaching and learning practices as well? All right, we can come back to that perhaps when we get into the look-fors for that section and start to define what excellent looks like. Shiv, did you have another comment or question?
Yes, ma'am. Just building upon what the young lady said just a minute ago. If we're looking at this and we know that it's for Black students, when we say meaningful instructional professional development and coaching, or looking at these categories, if we were to say quality curriculum for Black students, what are we looking at? Or excellent teaching and learning practices for Black students? If we were ending all of that for Black students, does that change the categories or the dimensions? Beyond the classroom academic supports based on student needs for Black students. That changes the whole, I think, dynamic of that. Am I clear, or I don't know if I'm making sense or not.
Gemma, did you want to respond to that or add an additional comment or question?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about initially on the process team, and Paula, I just want to go back to this. You made a change in the initial PowerPoint that you put up, which makes the point, and that is the headline here says Category 2, Curriculum, Classroom Practices, and Academic Supports. So in order to focus what you did on with this discussion, and you made this change. So the headline, the footer, the headline would always be the same. So if you move Category 2 and you kept this the same, but that banner that's used on the overall process, the very first one, it says what the task force is about. And it's clearly stated there, best academic task force, right, for Black students. So if that was the lead on every page, it would take care of what Ms. Collins said, because that was the same question I raised initially when we first started the process. Although it was on the front page, when you get into page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, people have forgotten about that already. So the focus is nothing more than, I think, and Ms. Collins can respond to this. If Category 2 was dropped down, you had the same banner on the same page all the way through, it would be consistent. And I just think that might help the overall process, because that's what we're focused on. That would be the focus. And subliminally to that, tag at the top would always be these issues, and people would not get lost in the shuffle.
I agree with you, Mr. McWilson. That was exactly the point. Is the further we get along with this and get into the categories and dimensions, I think we may shy away from what our true purpose is. So we have to constantly go back and say, it's for Black students. That's the whole idea. Thank you very much for that.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. McWilson. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it makes it a lot more clear for me because I'm just getting lost, and we aren't off of dimension 2.
That is a that is a good segue into us moving on to the start getting into the look fors, because I think there's definitely some interest in talking about some of those look fors. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on, but hopefully I've captured everyone's thoughts on this first screen. And again, if you think about these dimensions and you think to yourself, oh, actually we're missing something, or one of these dimensions doesn't make sense, always feel free to follow up with that. So let's start talking a little bit about the look fors for Dimension 1, evidence-based instructional framework or program. So here, do these seem like the kinds of look fors that we could use if we wanted to go into a district or a school and understand if they're really implementing this instructional framework? Or do these seem like the right look fors? Are there things you would add or things that don't belong here?
Go ahead, Merle. You want to start?
Yes, thank you. The first one, I'm still, it's already been mentioned about the instructional framework, and that just is just so generic that I think it needs to be clarified. But I really like the third bullet, and Paulo, you might remember I mentioned this during the book study. Yeah. That specific time is set aside for teacher collaboration. That is so important. So often people say teachers need to talk to each other, but during my own experience in faculty meetings, majority of the time was spent up with the principal, telling us what he or she wanted us to do, and there was really no time left for teachers to talk to each other. So that's really important. So I'm glad to see that that is there.
Jima, you got your hand up as well?
No, that may have been.
Sorry, from last time.
Yeah, but I think the big thing for me is I think she's correct about that. I hear that from teachers that we talk to in focus groups, that they're supposed to have prep time, and then some people have one prep period, and some have two. And so it's being careful as to ensuring that each one has sufficient time, even though there may be reasons for another one to have more time. All of them should have at least base time, going back to what she just said.
Right, and I think Burl's point is also the notion of collaborative time, because sometimes the prep time, teachers work alone, and while that's okay, I think what we see more and more is that the education of students is a collaborative, whether it's teachers at the same grade level or teachers in the same subject area when you get into high school, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right, I understand that. My question then takes it another step. I was using prep time in terms of that was time they had time to get together if they so choose. So are we talking about two separate times, a period for collaboration and a period for prep? Because I think that would need to be known, because it would have possibly an impact on contract and on money.
Sure.
And we want to be careful about not imposing something or recommending something that's going to impact either the contract or money, but just be clear of, if we're doing that, that's okay, we do it, but we need to be intentional about it.
And sometimes that depends on the administrator. Sometimes they'll set up professional development time where the staff members can get together with people that share the same students or go over data, but not every administrator does that.
Right.
And let me clarify, when I said specific time for teacher collaboration, I meant during the school day. And I'm glad that the gentleman mentioned those other points, because when you talk about contracts and principals want to set up time at the end of the day and don't want to pay teachers for it, then that becomes a problem. So the way I see it, the way it was when I taught in middle school, is that we actually had time during the school day to collaborate, or at least provide time during the faculty meeting. When I taught, we had faculty meetings monthly, I think, whatever it was, but setting up some kind of time during the school day for teacher collaboration. If you have meetings afterwards, then making sure that teachers are paid for that and not asking them to volunteer their time. But just some time for teachers to talk to each other, that is just major. That is of major importance.
Didn't the school, this is Willie Ann Moore, didn't the schools with the best academic practices and practitioners, didn't they have team meetings where they did have their planning periods, and they planned in teams so that they could discuss all of the students within that grade level, and it wasn't infringing on the union contract, because the union is not going to, it hasn't been bargained. If they have prep time, it has to be in the contract. But if it is in the contract and there are team, they did team meetings, prep meetings for dealing with students and discussing how they could better help students. That makes a lot of difference, and we still need to go back to the best practices and practitioners to see what they've done and what has been successful, to see what needs to be looked for.
Ms. McAbee, did you have a question or comment that you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you. A comment. Are we able to move beyond item 3 that we've been discussing on this list? Hello?
I was waiting to see if anyone wanted to chime in, but I think we can.
Okay. So the last two, access to career technical education and access to work-based learning. I believe that very important for the demographic that we're serving here. These are two things that make education relevant. And the thing that I would really like to see here is that this be connected to business and industry. Because if in fact this goes forward without relevant connection to business and industry, we often have individuals who are trying to prepare students in these areas who are not up to speed on the latest areas of business and industry that are moving forward, that have great numbers of openings and those kinds of things. So I think that really being intentional about connections to business and industry in those two areas are important.
So are we talking about exposure for our students so that they know what is expected from business and industry?
Mm-hmm.
I concur with that. So how would we do that? Would we start them as early as 8th graders, or high school, or after high school? How would we introduce that? How would we integrate that?
If I may, I think there are a lot of different strategies that districts do use to introduce work-based learning and career technical education, and to sort of reflect back what you said, Ms. Mockbee. I really like the phrase you used about this is what makes education relevant, and we want to capture that in all classes, really. So there's a lot of different strategies for doing that, and it may be that part of this group can help to, in the words of another commenter, sort of hear from the field what those best practices are, what's working out there, and start to share out those examples with others so that they can implement them as well. I want to go ahead and just in the interest of time, kind of move us on to the next dimension. There are a lot, for this first category, there are a lot of dimensions. So I want to make sure you have a chance. I know there were several people saving comments for some of these look fors. So under quality curriculum, this is dimension 2. The look fors here are teachers have a deep understanding of subject area standards. There's careful selection of quality instructional materials and appropriate professional development. What are your thoughts on these look fors? Is there anything that we should add or clarify or take away from this particular dimension? Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. We keep talking about quality, and I think we need to make that more specific to African American students. If we could say culturally relevant, because just saying quality, to me, is so generic. And if we're specifically talking about using Marsha's word, relevance, then hopefully we can start using culturally relevant instructional materials instead of just quality.
Cool. And Mr. Collins.
Yes, ma'am. I think very specific here when we're talking about quality curriculum. I think being very specific about what we want, again, as Marsha and Merle both have said, quality is generic, but being specific. Just making sure when we talk about quality curriculum, teachers achieve a deep understanding of what, how to teach Black students, or that they have knowledge of the students that they're coming from. So perhaps to look for something else to add on there is the teacher's understanding of the students. That may be in a different category. Maybe that goes under leadership and organizational commitment or something like that. But here, I think when we talk about teachers, making sure they understand what's going on. As we discussed in our book study, there may be other variables that aren't there. Maybe it is, and we'll get to that too, maybe it is the school environment that why a child isn't coming to school, as opposed to some variables at home that may exist. So we have to look at that. Maybe it's the teacher that's completely turning them off. So I think being specific and intentional with what we're saying, careful selection of instructional materials. Are they going over the same things over and over again from a history standpoint? Thank you.
That might go under the next dimension, excellent teaching and learning practices. So just saying that that's a great suggestion, and maybe that would fit under dimension 3, excellent teaching and learning practices.
Yep, I think I might have jumped ahead. Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look at
this. I wasn't being critical. I was just making a suggestion.
No, you're absolutely right. You're right.
Let's go ahead and take a look at this dimension then, because I know there was a question earlier about that definition of what does excellent mean, which I think is right in line with a lot of comments raised throughout this. What do we really mean by all these terms? And let's be very clear about it. So let's take a look at this dimension, and what would you add or change or take away here, or take away here?
Okay, my hand's raised.
Oh, go ahead.
I can't tell if my hand's raised or not sometime. It said it was raised. Okay. I want to follow up on the suggestion that was just made as far as teachers really knowing their students. And the third bullet says cultural relevance incorporated in the curriculum and lessons. But he's talking about cultural competence, I think. It's teachers knowing and appreciating the cultures of their students, knowing their students. So I don't see, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see anything that really talks about the teacher being a culturally competent teacher. Some have called that cultural humility, but I don't see anything that really points to that.
I agree, Merle.
Yep, well said. Well said. Yep.
And if I could just add there, I'm sorry, I have my hand raised. I want to make sure I'm not jumping ahead of anyone.
You're fine, please.
Jumping ahead because I can't see anyone or screen or anything. So I'm just. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, Ms.
Okay,
Moxie, go ahead.
The other thing, okay, cultural relevance incorporated into curriculum and lesson sounds like an add-on. And so I think the conversation about cultural competency as a basis in instruction is really critical.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know we went away too, but where it talked about teachers achieving this level of understanding, I would like to see that say demonstrates, because it's hard to determine whether someone's achieved a level of understanding, but you're able to see if somebody demonstrates it or not.
That's really good. Can we go back to dimension 2 so we can see what Marcia was talking about?
Yeah, see where it says teachers achieve a deep understanding of subject area standard. I think that should be teachers demonstrate a deep understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I believe we had a couple other folks who had some thoughts about this slide. Mr. McWilson, I think you maybe started to share something, and then I believe there was another individual as well.
First bullet. Black students are challenged and held to high expectations, great level, and high work, and is emphasized. Black students, because again, when things are generic, specifically in some of the language used around standardized information that is already out there within the system, this neutralizes the Black students as opposed to being specific to Black students, because this is about them being challenged and held to high expectations, which is not always the case because people are uncomfortable talking about high students. I'm engaged in a district right now where they refuse to talk about Black students, period. So the necessity of making this specific, explicit, intentional is critical. People may not do it, but we shouldn't shy away from it. So that first bullet, clearly, distinctly, and specifically, should say Black students are challenged and held to high expectations. And great level or higher work is emphasized or demonstrated, however that goes, but Black students should be the beginning of that sentence.
Thank you. Right. Oh, Mr. McWilson, did you want to share some more?
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I have received word from Superintendent DeMaria that we're going to be given a little extra time. to continue our discussion and to go ahead and just, focus in on category 2 here. So I just wanted to let you all know about that slight change in plans. Ms. Johnson, did you want to add some thoughts? Ms. Johnson, I think your hand is raised. Do you have?
I'm sorry, I didn't unmute. Okay. Bullet 2, use of multi-tiered systems of supports. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's another jargony one, Merle.
Yes, it's very jargony, and that's why I'm asking. I like that word, jargony.
Well, the classic description I give of multi-tiered systems of supports is, it's got, people generally talk about it in terms of 3 tiers, where the tier 1 is sort of the basic tier, and then as you understand what student needs are to go, either deeper or to help them clarify certain concepts, you get into sort of tier 2 and tier 3 kinds of instructional support, approaches that are, focused on either a smaller group of students or even individualized. But your point, you probably know what a multi-tiered system is. It's just we have to use better wording than what I used here.
Because after your explanation, if I were a community member, I still wouldn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And so it needs to be worded in a way that is much clearer.
Yeah. It's almost like students get the academic supports they need, and some of them get it because, they get it in the broad instructional approach, and others need it to be more focused or concentrated or what have you. We'll figure it out.
Paula, is that a part of your MTSS?
Yeah, right. It is MTSS, but
Okay, so,
again, even as we say it that way, right? It clouds.
That's already out there, and people are putting it in their strategic plans. So it just needs to be for you, for educators, is MTSS with this explanation. But that means for the public, what does that mean?
Yeah,
is what we talked about up front. How do you translate that to the parent whose child is?
Put the more accessible language in the look for, and then in the parentheses, put the more technical acronyms and things like that.
Yeah.
There you go. Yep.
All right. Let's take a look at Dimension 4, Meaningful Instructional, Professional Development, and Coaching. So here we have quality professional development and support regarding high quality classroom practices and frequent and meaningful observations and actionable feedback for teachers. So open it up to this group. What are your thoughts about these look-fors?
This is Willie Ann Moore. I can't raise my hand because I can't get on Microsoft, so I'm on the phone.
All right.
But I just need to know, or what I have not seen is what are the barriers that the students may have or that the teachers may have, and what is being implemented to overcome those barriers or challenges.
And Willie Ann, you mean academically, right?
Yes, academically, culturally, all of the barriers for all of the categories. There may be barriers or challenges, like cultural competency. There may be barriers and challenges there. What's being done to overcome those challenges and remove those barriers?
And I think we addressed some of those in some of the other dimensions. And obviously, if there are, your question about barriers is actually a good one, because a lot of times I think we struggle with, okay, well, what are the barriers? Is the barrier that the teacher isn't you know, delivering the instruction in a way that's receivable by the student? Is it that the student is, you know, doesn't see, you know, can't relate to the content? I'm trying to think of what other types of barriers we recognize
Well, that
routinely.
the teacher is not getting enough in-service support, or it may be coming from the leadership at the top. That may be a barrier.
Yeah.
Or
well, the leadership is covered in the leadership category. I think in this dimension, this is really about, is there good quality professional development and coaching that allows, you know, that supports teachers in making sure they are reaching each child.
Right, but as a teacher, I would be asking, you know, there may be challenges or barriers within this dimension, and how am I going to address that, or what support am I going to have to address that?
Can I just respond? I think the barriers are being covered throughout this entire plan. For example, Willianne, I think one of the main dimensions that deals with barriers is meeting the whole child needs. That's dimension 1, category 3, student supports and empowerment.
It's in the student supports.
And that really addresses a number of the barriers that keep African-American children from being successful. Then I see the quality professional development here dealing with barriers. As far as student engagement, one of the barriers is that sometimes teachers don't know how to engage students to keep them involved and enjoying their learning. So I'm thinking that we're addressing a number of barriers as we go through each of these dimensions. Cultural relevance addresses a barrier where students not seeing themselves in their curriculum, feeling like they're invisible when it comes to learning about this country and about their subjects. So I'm just saying, I think a number of barriers are being addressed in these dimensions. And some of them we're not working on, that some other groups are working on them. I mean, the other group is working on them.
We have a few hands raised. We're going to go Mr. Collins, Mr. Stringer, and then Mr. McWilson, I think, in that order there. Mr. Collins, would you like to share?
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering if we could put something in there, or just maybe a point of clarity. One, who's doing the coaching and who's doing the professional development, and then who's watching the people who are doing the coaching and the professional development? How maybe that's a point of clarity with the suggestion wrapped in there with a side of bacon on it.
Mr. Stringer?
Hi, yes, thank you. I was going to say this is an area where I think you could maybe get some of those questions about cultural competency addressed. There are several organizations and agencies, I guess, that have professional development. I know here in our school district, we did the Racial Equity Institute's cultural competency training, which I think was very meaningful for many of the people in our school district. And so this is something, to me, I think in this dimension, this is some place where we can address some of that cultural competency, and as opposed to it being kind of a one-shot deal as we had here, this is where it could be an ongoing area of opportunity for that continuous professional development.
Thank you. Mr. McWilson?
Just an experience that I've had doing focus groups with teachers. One of the things in bullet 1 that over and over kept coming up and that is quality professional development as determined by the administrator is different than the quality effective professional development as needed, as stated by teachers. So how you deal with that here, the experience is the comment, multiple comments made. One, you know, we've been PD'd to death. It doesn't solve my problem. So just taking it from that point of view, there may be within the context of this statement, it's still about quality and effective professional development that meets the needs of the student. Because sometimes teachers do get a lot of professional development and they spend millions of dollars bringing people in, but at the end of the day, what the teacher in the classroom needed wasn't covered. So they need to guard against that in some way, that the language, there's an add-on, or maybe it's just quality and effective professional development to meet the needs of that child, and then embedded and continuous and all that. But it really needs to meet the needs of the teacher who's teaching the class as well. So I'm just bringing that up as statements that have been made by lots of teachers. They've been PD'd to death and not what they needed.
So like needs-based.
Yes, it's really asking the teachers what they need before you schedule a year's worth of professional development, because some may be weak in one area and strong in another, and maybe that could come with the collaborative working together as before, and some of it just may be needed outside of that.
Yeah.
But meeting the needs of the teacher is as important as meeting the needs of our students.
Yeah. But the need could also be identified through observation, because sometimes people won't admit that they're weak in an area or something, you know. The definition of what the need is could come from different sources, including the teacher, but also including others.
Correct. Absolutely.
I just want to let people know I'm extending the time till 2:20. And again, my goal for you all would be to get through just the dimensions for this this category. I'm gonna punt category 4 over to the other group. They're making a little, they're also having really robust conversations, just as you are. You guys are doing great. And my goal for you is just to finish getting through this particular category, which is frankly the most robust.
Thanks, Paulo. I wanted to make one comment in listening to your discussion about teachers' needs, and one of the look-fors, or actually maybe it's one of the dimensions, is for this category is creating or having conditions, the appropriate conditions for student learning, or supportive conditions for student learning. And one of the thoughts I had earlier was sort of, well, what about the conditions for teacher learning? Sure. And I'm not sure if that's captured maybe in the leadership and organization section, but I just have been, we've been having a lot of discussions about creating safe spaces for student voice, but also creating safe spaces and vulnerable spaces for teachers. So I wonder if that might be captured somewhere in this framework. And then my other question, which might also be captured somewhere in listening to the conversation about barriers, I believe we capture somewhere the need for data analysis and sort of engaging in that continuous learning. And so certainly that seems like something that should be potentially captured somewhere, so that local districts and schools can work to identify the barriers that they specifically need to prioritize and deal with. So I'm wondering if that might be captured somewhere as well.
I don't remember in each of these slides barrier removers as a part of one of the bullets, because I think barrier removers are critical. They're not defined, but they're there, and they're there in different places. And as I said about the last teacher group I did, one of the problems was that there were 3 teachers who had been teaching art and music for about 3, 4, and 5 years, the 3. And when the realignment took place, because they had English language arts, 2 had math, 1 English language arts, was actually their major. So what happened was in the realignment, they had seniority to 2 or 3 teachers that had been brought in those specific subjects. But because they had seniority, they had to bump the other teachers. But their big concern wasn't bumping them. It was that they needed help getting back to where they needed to be to teach the subjects for which they were accredited, but had not been doing for 3 to 5 years. It had been in music and in art, which is what they liked and they wanted. But that's the kind of thing when I'm talking about, that's a big barrier, because now, to me, they express a significant amount of fear, anxiety of going back into a classroom and teaching math, which they had not done for 4 years. And the time to get ready, or that professional development that maybe that person needs to be comfortable to get back to those students, because the student needs that teacher to be at that level that you would expect from a person who that's what their degree and that's what their license is about. So that's what I was trying to get at. How do we frame things in such a way, and it may be somewhere else, but I was just looking at this in terms of how it came up in our focus group.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer.
So then to Mr. McWilson's point, maybe there needs to be like some sort of a teacher needs assessment in this particular dimension. I mean, is that something that you think would maybe help here?
Yeah. If you look at quality professional development based on teacher needs and building needs, but how are they getting that professional development to meet the needs of the target group, both teacher, student, administrator, whoever. But if you're talking about quality, effective professional development for who? That's the teacher in the classroom, is that the administrator, is that whatever. But I think whatever comes after professional development should be inclusive of the needs of the staff, not just staff.
Gotcha.
All right, let's move on to dimension 5. Conditions here we go. Couldn't remember the phrasing, but here it is. Conditions conducive to student learning. And the look for is around effective classroom management and behavioral support processes. What else might you add here or clarify or change? Ms. Johnson.
I like effective classroom management. I really have a problem with orderly classrooms. That is not what classrooms should look like. So, you know, engage students or something like that, but orderly sounds just too military and doesn't sound like the students are going to be enjoying themselves. So I just really have a problem with orderly classrooms.
Ms. Johnson, this is Jim. I just want to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Most teachers, even though this is an old way that we're still lining students up, but if you're talking about a Montessori school,
Mm-hmm.
you expect a lot of activity. So is it that one has to describe what the district or building is using to define, quote, classroom management and what that looks like? And I understand your word orderly. I'm a former Marine, Navy, and war veteran, so I understand orderly. So I think there's something different in education. At least, how do you define effective classroom management, and how do you build that out for the majority of the teachers that are coming in? How would you do that?
That's a really, really good question, because I think that the term classroom management is really outdated. We're not managing classrooms anymore. And so I think we need to just think of a different way to say that. But you raise a very good point. you know, the whole idea is for things to be structured in a way that students are comfortable and they're engaged in the work. When I used to do training in this, there was a quote that said the most important classroom management technique is student engagement. You know, if students are enjoying what they're doing and they're involved in projects and so forth, then the classroom basically manages itself. Mm-hmm. So I just think we need to look at that first bullet and just figure out a way to say that in a way that is more 21st century and more related to students actually being engaged and involved, and not thinking of a teacher up front saying do this and do that and sit in rows. So
right.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
So, Mr. Superintendent, if you walked into a classroom in a building, and would you say the classroom is engaged or orderly just by your visual observation?
No, Merle makes a great point, because sometimes a classroom may appear to be chaotic, but actually a lot of good stuff is happening. So I love that you've raised this, Merle, and I think there is a way to, you know, it's like students are doing what they're supposed to be doing, engaged in the learning per the educational approach being adopted in that classroom, right? I mean, you know, it's a number of factors, but learning is happening, I think, in an intentional way, in spite of the fact that it might actually be pretty disorderly. We can figure it out.
Well, project-based learning is disorderly. You know, it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're each. I mean, the Harvey kids are making cars and so forth, and they're, you know.
I think the notion of engagement is the right one. Although I think we get engagement in a different dimension, but we can finesse it. I think this is helpful conversation that can help us shape the words.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you, Gemma, for that question.
No problem.
Excuse me, Merle, remember when we used to have our classrooms set up in learning stations and the kids would be continuously moving, and I guess maybe people thought it was chaotic, but it wasn't.
It was good.
It was good. It was good. and still is today in many still an effective strategy.
Yes.
Ms. Maccabee, I believe you have something you'd like to share.
Yes, in terms of this movement to 21st century kind of thinking and language, I think one of the things that's important here would be that all opinions and all students, all participants, of course, including the teacher, are respected. So, you know, we talked about engage, but respected, I think is an important part that, you know, when the norms, when the young people get a chance to help set the norm for how they operate, I've seen that they're a lot more likely to self-monitor and help to monitor, you know, the environment. So I think that issue of respect and how that community gets built in those classrooms is important.
Thank you.
Marsha, could we say mutual respect? Were they respecting each other or something like that?
That's good, Merle. Yes.
Well, shouldn't the students and the teachers be setting the standards for that particular room? For that particular, I mean, because we used to let our students be involved in making the rules as to what was going to go on in the class, because it's their class. And, you know, I mean, I was the adult, you know, I had my input, but they also had their input. And when we were done, you know, we just had to narrow it down to how many rules we were going to display. but that was voted upon democratically by everyone in the class. So you're right. Students, it should be mutual respect, and it would, and it normally is mutual when they're involved in the process.
Exactly. Agree. Yep. That's what I was saying too. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. McWilson and Ms. Johnson, you both have your hands up, and I'm not sure if that was from before or
That's
additional
probably
time.
from before. I thought I lowered mine.
Okay. All right.
Yep,
why
I
don't you-
lowered mine too. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. Just didn't want to move on to our last dimension. If there were any remaining thoughts about this one. So our last dimension is dimension 6, beyond the classroom academic supports based on student needs. Quality tutoring opportunities, more learning time, and use of supplemental learning tools. So we have minutes left for our conversation, and would love to hear your thoughts about this dimension and these look-fors. Mr. McWilson?
My hand is not up.
Okay.
Let me-
Apologies. It may be on my end. It may just be an issue on my end.
Is it down now?
No, it's up again, Jim. There you go.
Yeah.
Down.
Okay, is it down? Okay. Thank you. I don't want to take your time, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay. What are your thoughts about this?
I wanted to ask Apollo, doesn't the state have a program for students that have not graduated or have graduated and need additional help for employment or for getting their diploma or for extra special needs? And I'm not. I know that I was listening to one of the meetings that you had. Maybe. Pardon?
Go ahead.
But I think that that implementation would be an added plus for African American students who are at the lower end, the lowest end of the academic spectrum, so that it would be raising up the bottom in order to help those young people become employable and successful.
Yeah, there are a number of things that can happen within a school. There's like credit recovery programs. Sometimes, especially if a student had a difficult start in high school and didn't get all their credits and find themselves senior year. So some, have intensive, even alternative, I won't say alternative schools, but alternative programs that really focus on credit recovery. Then we also have, if a student drops out, you've got the whole GED, and that kind of infrastructure. And then you have the 22 plus, some of these programs that help people that didn't get their diploma, re-enter the academic environment and get their diploma and maybe get an industry credential and so forth and so on. So there are a number of things that speak to that.
Well, could some of those things be listed?
I think we could. I mean, again, I think the
Because
ultimate goal.
There are a lot of students and parents in my community that know nothing about those programs.
Yeah, interesting. And maybe it's the district or the school's attention to understanding those options or creating and implementing those options in the interest of, again, meeting the particular academic circumstances, right, that a student might face.
Right, but we're talking about the transparency of it, so that if someone was looking at what we've done, we have included this so that they would know where to go, or, you know, what if,
Or what to ask about,
or
yeah.
what, right, look, you know, what to look for. So
Yeah, yeah.
Right, we have several hands raised and just a few minutes left. Mr. McWilson, I believe you raised yours first, and then Ms. Mockbee and Ms. Johnson. So Mr. McWilson, do you want to go ahead and share?
Yeah, just a quick note on all three. And this is for basically the follow-up for you to think of it based on what Mrs. Moore was saying. A lot of places do not, within the construct of the IEP, make it very clear to parents that there are transitional supports straight through to 21. So several of my cases have been such. Families didn't have access at the time to more information. It was not on the website of the district. So I think that kind of goes to the heart of what she's saying.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah, also, in terms of tutoring, we just completed a 5-year review of grade point averages. One particular school, we're talking about quality tutoring now. If a student gets quality tutoring after school, and that child during the course of the year of school, the average GPA for Black males in that school was 0.94. The average grade point average for the school was 1.09. Tutoring at that point after school takes on a whole different kind of impact in terms of what the tutor can accomplish after school, given the fact the child is already so far behind that, and that has happened during the course of the year. So those intervention processes with MTSS, PBIS, IEP, tutoring during the course of the day, all need to be impacting that child, and not at the end of the school year when the world finds out that this group and this school is at 1.9 as a school and 0.94 for Black males in the school. So, and the community gets outraged, and then the district under Ferber said, well, we can't release information. And then people who want to help the students can't, because they can't target them.
Right.
So you're caught in a quandary, right? And therefore you get these bad feelings because now the year's already over. And that's some of the stuff. So when we say quality tutoring under normal circumstances, which you and I have talked about before, that works. Under abnormal circumstances, it requires a whole different level of, quote, intervention, tutoring, support for students.
It's making sure that intervention happens early, is identified early and applied early, rather than letting it linger.
Yeah, so something here about appropriate timing or something. When you're looking at it, just look at it from the standpoint of what is being looked at, so that they don't get to the end of the year and they're already, quote, dead in the water. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know we're going to be joined any moment now by the members from Group A. So we can continue talking, but if you don't get a chance to share your thoughts, please share them in the chat, share them as we debrief in a little bit, or certainly, email or otherwise let Paulo or others know your thoughts. I want to make sure that
Heather, why don't you go ahead and take Marcia and Merle's comments on this last dimension, and that'll wrap up this discussion, because you're right, the other group is joining, but they can listen to you all converse here for the next 5 or so minutes. Go ahead.
So,
thank you, Superintendent Paulo. Mine is quick. First of all, Jim, I just really appreciate what you just offered. I thought that was so right on time. The thing here that I think is missing is academic enrichment, because all of these things are based on, fixing a problem, and academic enrichment is something that can begin to raise students' expectations for themselves, help to open them up to opportunities that they've not been introduced to before. And what we found is that's really a key to getting students to want to do better in school and, you know, go the extra mile in the tutoring and other things. So I think academic enrichment has to be included here in this list.
I would agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Johnson, you had your hand raised as
Yes,
well.
mine is quick too. I want to say ditto to the last two comments, the enrichment and the catching the tutoring at the beginning when the students need it. That's really good. And I just wanted to mention that serving on the Teaching, Leading, and Learning Committee on the state board, we always talk about the underutilization of programs like the Adult 22 Plus and so forth. And so it's really important to add those kinds of programs in here. So I just wanted to add that.
Great. Thank you, Heather, for doing such a great job.
Yes, thank
Oh.
you so much, Heather. And thanks to all of you for just really rich conversation. I'm so appreciative of the engagement and the work. And I know the other group has joined us as well. So I want to thank Stephanie Siddons for her great facilitation and that group as well for rich conversations. And so we are now at 2:25. We are scheduled to end at 3 o'clock. I would like to take a little bit of time, and maybe I'll just ask the facilitators to each give a quick overview of maybe some of the the nature of the discussions and if there were some key takeaways in each of the categories and generalizations that you can make. I think that would be helpful. Stephanie, you want to go first?
Sure, yes. So we had a great discussion. We were categories 1 and 3.
And I also asked them to pick up 4 at the end.
And 4, we were assigned another one. So around category 1, a lot of what we reflected on included what recognition. So in dimension 1, and Paulo, I don't know, should we show? I don't know if we should show the dimensions to help everyone, but I'll just reflect. But I think we talked about what explicit recognition looks like. So one of the look fors was around a board or superintendent having explicit recognition. And so we talked about the importance of both kind of doing and saying, and what does, does it just need to be in a board meeting, or does it need to be in a broader set of the district itself, for example. And then we also reflected on benchmarking and target setting, and where we need to be thinking about local benchmarking, not just national benchmarking or comparable schools, or even within large districts, school to school. Other reflections around category 1, let's see. We talked a little bit about the strategic planning process and using data to report out. So that, in fact, in Ohio, we have many districts are leveraging state support teams and engaging in a 5-step process, and the importance of having building and district leadership teams being engaged in that process. So we've spent a little time on that. Around dimension 3, around quality principles, we actually spent quite a bit of time talking about the importance of recruitment and retaining Black principals, and how to ensure that we are growing from within. But there was also reflection of, for districts that may not have many Black teachers, for example, to develop how we would go about encouraging development and, recruiting just personnel within the district, or to become members of the district. So there was time spent on that, and the importance of also creating a network of principals and quality principals to help build skills, development, and support. Am I getting too detailed? Or are you okay?
No, you're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Okay, great. So dimension 4, around leveraging all staff to be committed leaders. So we reflected quite a bit on this not being just work within the classroom, but also how do we ensure our district staff are actually engaged in the community as well. And knowing that it may not be that everyone lives within their community, but making a point to ensure that staff are actually engaged, whether they live in the community or not, and that they would want to place their own children in the community as well and feel safe and welcomed. And so I think we reflected on that a little bit in this one and how to create that. And then, so that kind of, those were reflections on category 1. And then with category 3 on student supports. So around meeting the needs of the whole child, we talked a lot about how do we kind of show examples of the different types of, the different ways that districts can engage in both, it may be on campus, off campus, or other types of social service or physical health professionals to provide whole child supports. And so the idea that Look4s would include how districts are engaged with different types of organizations, as well as different types of personnel like counselors, social workers, that those are ways that you have evidence that you're engaged in that. We also spent some time talking about, in the context of discipline and children who are in need and may be in crisis, and that we need to think about restorative practices and restorative justice approaches. So that we really should probably develop in the context of the trauma-informed practices Look4. So that probably is worth some more addition there. And then we talked a little bit about schools having team support. So so there were student engagers or encouragers who are responsible for speaking to a child in crisis or in a situation where they need support, and it's in a restorative way rather than consequential or in an angry way, so that there would be evidence of team supports in the school. And then dimension 2 around student belonging and pride, we talked about adding student voice, making sure that students are heard, not just in the context of maybe an advisory group for students who may not be wanting to engage that way, but to have like a concerns box or a student survey where all students are given access. We also talked about leveraging technology, using Flipgrid technology, similar to the Brady Bunch video I actually typed that in, where they're, talking about issues and, able to really gather and help to engage each other. And then the concept of mentoring was reflected on as well, that it's not just about having mentors, but ongoing mentor development and training for even mentees. So those were among what we talked about. And then let's see, student self-awareness. So here we spent some time just talking about, well, at the very end, actually, we came back to this, wondering about whether we needed to add a new dimension or around the concept of early career planning and thinking, that there's, just whether we should call out specifically how important it is to start young with children in helping them understand where they may see themselves, and then how we can support them in their career development. So that was some of what we discussed there. And then our last newly assigned category was around 4, community and family supports and partnerships. So here we just some reflections that we quickly spent time on here was around supports for families, and making sure we saw evidence that districts were offering supports for families to help support their children's education, having different ways and modalities for engaging parents. We know that, in person may not be, after a pandemic year, virtual became a way that actually more parents were engaged with schools than they ever used to be before. And then also just the importance of parents feeling that they have a sense of belonging and being welcomed. And so that's probably, I think we should, that's in the student side in the earlier category, but I think this concept of parents feeling belonging and welcomed. And then lastly, around community partnerships, we wanted to add more examples to the current list, which is around adding faith-based organizations as examples for partnerships, also directly addressing career readiness organizations, and then military and armed service organizations as well.
Great, great. Nice.
And
Well,
Group A did such a great job, and please let me know if anyone wants to add anything.
Yeah.
I know that was super fast.
Very good. Now I'm going to go over to Heather and talk about category 2.
Wonderful. So category 2 is around curriculum, classroom practices, and academic supports. And I want to share a few overarching themes that ran through several of the slides, and then I'll go through some of the more detailed comments. But so throughout the conversation, we talked a lot about the importance of the language that we're using. And we know we want to create a tool that is of practical use for districts, schools, advocacy groups. We also want this to be something that is transparent and accessible to families and students. And so we have to watch out for the jargony language that we have a tendency to use and be really intentional and thoughtful about the words that we're using. And in keeping with that theme about intentionality around language, we talked a lot about wanting to create resources that are designed in a way that the purpose of this task force, the purpose of this tool to support Black students specifically is front and center in all the resources that we produce, so that it's so we don't lose track of that goal. And we can do that in a number of different ways in the documents and products that we design. We also talked for several of the look-fors, very specifically saying we want to create high quality curriculum for Black students, and just adding that phrase in a number of the look-fors so we don't lose track. And then I think there was another. Oh, and then again, in keeping with the theme of language, we talked a lot about needing to be very clear in defining some of the terms that we use. So when we say quality, what do we mean by that? And just getting very clear about what we mean by some of these terms. So within category 2, there are 6 dimensions. The first is around evidence-based instructional frameworks or programs. And this is where we started talking about transparency of language and making sure that parents and students and families can understand what we're talking about. Another point of discussion around this dimension was the look-for around teacher collaboration and the importance of having opportunity for teacher collaboration, both for preparation, but also to come together, not just to sort of prepare, but to collaborate during the school day. That was an important point made, that this isn't meant to be outside of the school day, but a part of a teacher's daily work. On dimension 2, this is around quality curriculum. And here again is where we wanted to be very specific about what we mean by quality curriculum. And had some discussion about how we don't want just quality curriculum, we want culturally relevant curriculum and culturally relevant instruction. And here another sort of common theme that we talked about across several of these dimensions was the question of whether or not teachers understand the students they are serving and understand their needs. So we started talking about that in this dimension, but then carried that conversation forward to dimension 3, which is on excellent teaching and learning practices. And here started talking a little bit more about incorporating some language that captures whether or not teachers understand the students they're serving, and thinking about the kinds of professional development that we may want to offer around teachers being culturally competent. And then here too, actually, we talked a little bit about, again, language. We talked in one of the earlier dimensions, it talks about teachers achieving a deep understanding of subject area standards, but what we really want is teachers to be able to demonstrate a deep understanding of standards and demonstrate cultural competence, not just achieve those things, but what are the look-fors for that? So we know that's happening. Let's see, dimension 4 is around meaningful instructional professional development and coaching. Here we talked a lot about who is doing the coaching, who's doing the professional development, and where's the accountability for ensuring that that coaching and professional development is effective and meeting the needs. And to that point, we want to be clear that we want professional development and coaching to not just meet administrators' needs, but also to meet teachers' needs. And so the professional development needs to really help teachers in the classroom, and they should be engaged in a needs assessment process or have some other opportunity to sort of voice what they need as classroom teachers to do this work, and then have the opportunity to receive training around that. Dimension 5 is conditions conducive to student learning. And here we had some good discussion about the language that we're using and whether phrases like effective classroom management really accurately capture what we want to get at here. And I think the general agreement was no, it doesn't. What we really want to capture is our students engaged in a learning environment where learning is taking place. And even if it doesn't look orderly, they are learning and they are engaged. And we talked a lot about the importance of students having an opportunity to help create the norms of their classrooms and how important that is for them, and how that will then likely lead to greater engagement. Last but not least, dimension 6, beyond the classroom academic supports based on student needs. We talked a little bit about some additional programs or supports that might be needed to be added here specifically to support students who are at risk of not graduating on time or perhaps have dropped out. And then we also had some really good discussion around again, thinking about what quality means and what it might mean under different circumstances, and talked a lot about the importance of the timing of these supports. We want it to happen at early enough that students that we can help students, before it's too late. And then finally, we talked about how important it would be to add academic enrichment. A number of the look-fors here listed currently are really look for strategies to fix problems. Academic enrichment will give students the opportunity to see everything that might be available to them in the future, all the opportunities open to them in the future, and help ensure that they remain engaged in their learning. So I welcome all members of Group B to please chime in if I've misrepresented anything or left out anything important, but really enjoyed listening to the discussion around this category.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. And I went sort of back and forth between the two groups and was just blown away by the good engagement that was going on and the good commentary. I'd love for some folks to reflect on how they're feeling now. Do they feel like are we moving in the right direction? Do you feel like the framework is starting to come together with the right pieces and parts, and that this first round of refinements or this process, did it work for you? I see Marcia nodding her head.
Thanks, Paulo. Yes, I do feel like it's coming together, and I want to appreciate the thoughtful exercise that was designed to engage us, to really be able to do some deep analysis and really sort of challenge the language and challenge and begin, because I think if we get the framework, the vision about what we're trying to do right up front, the other things that flow from this will be much more likely to be in alignment. So right. I thought this was a great exercise, and I enjoyed my group. Thank you.
Good. Other reflections? Go ahead, Gemma.
I think the one thing in our group that goes back to the process team is making sure that the header on each of those pages
Absolutely. Yeah.
specifically speaks to the purpose, and the subline to the purpose was delivering on the promise of Brown. I mean, that's the entire tagline, because this all goes back to Brown. And if people haven't read Brown, you really need to read it, because that 9-0 decision did contain specific language about education and state responsibility. And that's the reason for that. I think it can balance people out, because sometimes you get very involved and you forget, what are we focused on? And that line definitely takes you to the legality of what we're doing, how long standing it's been, and we're still 65 years later trying to deliver on that promise. And this is a good part of that practice.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Other reflections. I do want to make a comment to our observers. Again, appreciate you joining us and appreciate your listening to the process. I also want to welcome your comments. And you should feel free to send those to me or drop me a note, or if you wanted to have a phone call, I could set up a phone call with you. I'll put my email in the chat. It's paulo.demaria@education.ohio.gov. And again, you've listened to a lot, and we welcome your commentary as well on this work, because one of the things we're going to do is do some stakeholder engagement. And you all have been kind enough to observe and listen in, and so your commentary is welcome as we undertake this work. So we are at 2:45. I was going to have Randall talk a little bit about portfolio curation. Randall, I'm not going to have you do that, but I would like you to why don't you give us 2 or 3 minutes on what we mean by that. And then what I'm going to do is ask Randall to do a learning session, and I'll send you a notification about when that is, and we'll record it. And so we can continue to explore that particular idea. Randall, you want to share a little bit for a couple minutes here?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if I can turn my camera on here so folks can see me. There we go. So when we talk about the portfolio process, it's like Paulo said earlier, it's just not good enough to have a checklist. So we are creating a framework right now. We'll send it probably out as recommendations for districts to use and schools to use as a guide. And folks will get in their committees and they will have a checklist. Yes, we're doing this check, we're using that check, and then they put it on the shelf, and it's back to business as usual. What the portfolio does is it provides schools with the opportunity to really share some of these dynamic things that they're doing. So whether you're in Steubenville, Ironton, Cleveland, Dayton, and everything in between, we understand that you're doing different things because you have different communities. And the portfolio allows you to highlight what you're doing, and you can share it with your local community and be accountable to your community. It's not necessarily an accountability system to the state, but you're accountable to your community and the people that you serve in your community. And it allows them to see what you're doing, and they can get behind you and support you as a district. So you're going to highlight some of the really great things. When we do the working session, we'll talk more about it. But in the state of Ohio, every high school football player has a highlight reel online. It's portfolioed with the aspirations of playing for Ohio State sometime. Same concept that needs to be in every school district. Let's put our highlight reels, the great things that we're doing based on these parameters, put them on the highlight reel or the portfolio and put it out there for everyone to see in our community. So that's the key. And how do we get stakeholders to really engage? And now when we talk about, are we making progress towards the promise of Brown? We have definitive evidence that shows, yes, we are. We're going fast. We're crawling. We're at a medium speed. What can we do to get better, faster, and stronger as we bring new people on board, as people in the community shift and move? How can we enhance the promise of board that we want? And that's what the portfolio process does. And if you look at Ohio State football as an example, once again, you walk into their facilities, you see pictures of Eddie George. You see pictures of of the great late Terry Glenn, Chris Carter, Jim Stillwagon, all the greats, Hopalong Cassidy, right? All of that stuff, all of the greatness is portfolio. So you can see the progress over time. And that's what we don't have in education. We have people who retire and they take all of that institutional memory with them, and we're stuck in a vicious cycle trying to move forward.
It's also, it's also hard to fake a portfolio. In other words, it's hard to say, we've got great instructional practices, or you could pretend that somebody could doctor up a video or say, okay, well, we're going to stage this, but why stage it? When you could, if you're doing it right, you can just video, what's happening in the school, and if you do, sort of stage something, people know it's not right. You can, people will know if you tell me you've got a great culture in your school, but everybody knows it's a toxic culture. You can't really sweep those kind of things under the rug. So,
Yeah.
So we'll have Randall do a little more thorough kind of presentation, maybe show us some examples of what some schools or classrooms or others are doing to kind of, again, inspire us around this. How do you encourage schools to sort of, not just check the box, but document, the practices that we are trying to advocate for.
And a critical example, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
In higher education, we have portfolios. So that's another source to look at. Students, we advocate for students to have a portfolio. Just like when you're an artist or whatever, you can take that with you. Well, students are doing portfolios so they can document their progress in the subject matter. So there's another source to look at, Randall, how we, and if you need to, I could shoot something to you next week, but how we do it in higher education.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. Yeah, and when we're in our session together, Tom, one of the things that came up was about leadership, principal leadership. And we noticed that a lot of the items, the look for items were kind of, status quo, punitive, compliance-driven items. And we really wanted to have more authentic items in there for the principal leadership component. Mm-hmm. And in the presentation I'll make later, you'll see a principal named Cheryl Jones from Columbus City Schools, East Linden Elementary School. They are 2020 Hall of Fame school, the first urban school in Ohio to be a Hall of Fame school. Question is, how'd they do it? Yeah. What happened? What are the processes? And it's all documented in videos, pictures, artifacts, and all the items from what they did. So that will be an example of something as to the principal leadership piece and also the other components in here.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, we are here in our last 9 minutes, so let me cover a little bit of ground. I talked about setting up 2 subcommittees. One to all the things that we talk about, by and large, have a good research foundation. Although we did not, some suggested maybe we should approach this by, pulling all the research together and extracting from that, and then interfacing with practice. I really am a believer that I'd like to see practice. So we brought school districts in to tell us what they were doing, and now we want to populate that template with some of the research references and some other tool references. So I want a little working group that I want to put together. And it'll probably be led. I know Randall said he'd be interested in helping lead this work, and somebody else on my staff, to really kind of gather. What I don't want is like page after page after page after page, because I always find that frustrating to try to, okay, well, what do I do with all these resources? So really focus on the high quality and most usable, frankly, resources in each of the main category areas, and identifying maybe a handful of tools that are also useful for that. So so that's one subcommittee I want to put together. The second subcommittee that I know Gemma and I have talked about is really about presenting data. How do we put data in a format that allows community members, advocates, and then also teachers and educators in the system to understand both where they are from a static perspective and whether they're improving or not. Ideally that happens every semester. And as some of you have mentioned, it's not really dependent on state data, because state data is always somewhat lagged, but it's using the district available data. And it might include, results out of student surveys or disciplinary measures, or obviously academic, assessments that are either maybe created by groups of teachers or the district's own formative assessment package, or what have you. GPA, Jim and I have talked about using GPA a lot and how that gets portrayed. So I'm envisioning a group that could come and contemplate, again, sort of like my little template, developing a data profile at a school level and at a district level that could be a standard or at least a suggested standard for populating information about that school or about that district that's very usable and that disaggregates data, and that also leaves room for comparing. Maybe I've got 3 elementary schools in my district, and I want to show how my elementary school is doing vis-a-vis the other 2. So a group that works on data presentation, what those data elements should be. So if you have an interest in being involved on either of those 2 groups, I need you to send me an email. All of you have my email because or all the task force members have my email because you get stuff from me. And I've also put my email in the chat. So let me know of your interest. And I'd like to, over the next week, cobble together the membership and then give those groups a little bit of a charge and some support, and let them start working, so that by the time we get to the September meeting, at least they have a little bit of a report out. They may not be done with their work, but they'll have something to say about the progress that they're making. So 2 groups, one on research and tools, one on data. The other thing I want you to start thinking about is, now that this issue of categories, dimensions, and look-fors is coming together, I think we're at a good place where we can do a little more stakeholder engagement. Many of you were appointed to the task force by recommendation of your association. Maybe it was OFT, maybe it was OSBA, maybe it was BASA. What I'd like you to start thinking about is, how might you pull together a group of your peers, maybe 8 to 10 people, doesn't have to be a big group, that could then be led through an exercise of reviewing the categories, the dimensions, the look-fors. We could send something out in advance so people could kind of get a sense of what it is, and then again get some good input into the process that further allows us to refine and strengthen the work that we're doing. So think about what that might look like, and I would love for some of you to again send me an email sharing your thoughts about how you could do that within the context of your peer group.
Paulo, can I make a suggestion?
Yes,
you want
please
to
do, Tom.
I would like to reach out to Marcia and let NAACP and the Urban League be the nucleus of this stakeholder,
Okay.
because I think ultimately in Chima's and our thinking, NAACP would be reaching out to our partners at the local level. So maybe Marcia and I can talk about how NAACP and Urban League begin the
Perfect.
conversation. Then we can figure out as we go into it how we expand it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Maybe the 3 of us
Paulo,
could get on the phone and sort of talk through what you're thinking and how we can support that.
Yeah.
Sure. I love that, Tom. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, now
Now-
that Urban League member is part of my family, I have to reach out to her. Nicole Miller is my niece.
Oh,
Nice.
okay.
I will also schedule a couple more learning sessions. The book study is continuing. We're doing every week. I forget. I think it's Thursday of every week. And I'm going to schedule a couple more learning sessions. One of them that I'd like to do is to have maybe pick a school that could take a look at our initial dimensions and reflect on that. And give us some, specific feedback saying, well, if I were to use this and view it through the lens of my school or district, here's where I think I see some things. Here's where I think I could, you might be able to make some improvements. So some very specific feedback from a practitioner perspective. And then of course, following up with Randall on his tool. Our next meeting is scheduled for September 17th, but in our last 3 minutes, I have had a number of members of the task force say they think we should shift to a later meeting time, because now that school's back in session, the 12:30 to 3 o'clock time slot is proved. I had a couple people say I can't make it in September, and I probably can't make it in October. in November. So we've got September 17th and October 8th. I am proposing going ahead and keeping the same days, but shifting it later in the day. And I'd love to have what kind of pushback, who does that create a problem for if we picked those same 2 Fridays, which is September 17th and October 8th, but if we shifted it to maybe a start time of, like, say, maybe even 4:30, or 4 to 6:30 or something like that. How much trouble does that create for people? Jim, I see your hand up. Do you want to comment?
No, it's fine for me. I just wanted to make sure in these learning sessions that you resend out to the group.
The links?
Not the links, the actual background data, historical data as to why we're
yeah.
this, because I think it's important that they understand the legislated constitutional background to all of this, and so we can neutralize the emotions and get directly to law and what's possible based upon what was. That would be helpful. If we're having learning groups, book studies, we can get off from the basis of what's the genesis of all this in the first place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not hearing, so maybe I should get more specific. Usually we schedule these for 2.5 hours. So it'd be either 4 to 6:30 or 4:30 to 7.
4 o'clock, we're still in dismissal, so that would not work for me.
All right, so 4:30 to 7. I know it's a little bit lengthy for the end of the day and on a Friday, but it's only one day. Okay, hearing nothing, what I'll do is I will put an email out to the whole group and suggest that and see any other feedback, give people one last opportunity to weigh in, and then likely based on that, make a decision about how to proceed. With that, I think I have covered everything. At the next meeting, so I'm going to try to process, working with my team, process all the things we've heard, begin to put it in the template format, send that back out to you. Again, always welcoming further additional comments. And then what I'd like to do at our next meeting is maybe get these subcommittees started, get a little report back from them, dig a little more deeply into the stakeholder engagement process, maybe look at some of the other purposes. One of the ones in particular that I struggle with is the whole, how do we, what do we say about good implementation? And how do we disseminate these materials? So I'm gonna think through what that might look like as part of our meeting, and structure a little agenda that begins to transition from the framework development into some of these other pieces and parts about dissemination and implementation, if that makes sense. So with that, unless there's anything else for the good of the order, again, thank you so very, very much for hanging out and for the great work that you accomplished today. I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to the next time we meet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you very much.
You
Have a
too.
great weekend.
Thank you.